global food inequality. Well, British scientists have succeeded in creating tomatoes rich in vitamin D using a process called gene editing, and it's thought the breakthrough will lead to the possibility of lessening the negative impact conventional farming has on the environment. Sky Science correspondent Tom Clark has been to meet those working on a trial in Norwich.
They don't look any different to ordinary tomatoes, which is very much the point. But these have been genetically edited to produce high levels of vitamin D. Normal tomatoes, like most fruit and veg, contain virtually none. But just one of these has as much vitamin D as 2 eggs or a serving of tuna. They used a gene editing technique called CRISPR-Cas9 to tweak the tomato's DNA.
We talk about genetic tweezers, so it really is very, very small nature equivalents. It can happen naturally, or it could happen naturally, but the amount of work and time required to make that change and then to select it and breed it in is prohibitively long.
The technique is fundamentally different to previous incarnations of genetic modification, or GM. Most GM products contain genes from another organism that confer a benefit. A type of GM cotton, for example, has a gene from a bacterium to make it resistant to insect pests. By contrast, gene editing inserts molecular machinery borrowed from bacteria to delete, swap or repeat genes already in the plant's genetic code before removing the foreign DNA afterwards. The difference is a crucial one because this week the government will put forward a bill making it much easier to bring gene-edited crops to market. And they're closer than you might think. This plot is the first crop of gene-edited wheat growing anywhere outdoors in Europe. And the researchers behind it hope that this change in the law will be the first step to taking crops like this out of field trials and seeing them benefit society.
It's the first positive step in crop biotechnology regulation in Europe or the UK for a generation, 25 years. And I've suffered all through that period. We've been waiting for this for a long time, and I think it's really a positive step.
This wheat has been edited to make less of the cancer-causing compound acrylamide when it's fried. But researchers are also looking at editing out common wheat allergens or making the crop more drought or pest resistant.
It's really important that we don't miss out on the next biotech revolution, which is gene editing. And that is already off and running in some parts of the world. United States, for example, several years, Canada, Brazil, Argentina. Just this year we see China and India moving on biotech, on gene editing. So really important that we keep up.
But opponents of gene editing dispute claimed similarities to traditional breeding and say the law change is a step towards more elaborate genetic engineering.
It's entirely misleading to say that gene editing doesn't involve the insertion of foreign genes. In fact, gene editing is a suite of technologies that range from a simple SNP to the complex insertion of foreign genes. And the traits that get scientists really excited, things like disease resistance and drought resistance, simply cannot be achieved without these complex technological interventions.
With gene editing, scientists have proven they've got a tool that could revolutionise food and farming, but they have some way to go to prove real benefits to society and the environment. Tom Clark, Sky News, Norwich.
Well, good growing weather at the moment. Let's have a look at the forecast.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And an active jet stream will steer cooler, wetter and windier weather this way over the course of the week. However, there'll be some brighter spells around as well, and it could settle down for the weekend. But right now, eastern parts of England, the rain will clear to the North Sea this evening, but there'll be some showers elsewhere. Well, now, health experts say that monkeypox only poses a very low threat and is not likely to bring disruption like COVID-19. It is, though, being recommended that contacts of monkeypox should self-isolate for 21 days, according to latest government guidance. Meanwhile, after recent cases were identified among gay and bisexual men, the United Nations AIDS Agency has called some reporting about the virus racist and homophobic, warning of exacerbating stigma and undermining the response to the outbreak. Well, now all day you've been sending us your questions and we'll do our best to answer them right now. Joining us is Oksana Pejic, Global Health Advisor and Lecturer at UCL School of Pharmacy, and Dr. Mark Lawton, Consultant in Sexual Health and HIV and Clinical Lead at the Liverpool Centre for Sexual Health. A very good evening to you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us for this important question and answer session. We're going to dive straight into our viewers' questions. We've had so many of them. And let's ask the first one, which so many people are thinking about. It's really three questions, and we'll take it in parts. First up then asks, how serious is it? Why has it been spreading so fast, and how likely is it that we will have a lockdown for it? Well, let's break that up then. How serious is it? What do you think, Oksana?
Well, all of the cases reported so far have been mild. There have been no deaths, and no people have required hospitalizations. That being said, in the areas where it is endemic, mostly in African countries, people have died, and there is an estimate mortality rate between 3 to 6%. This is a rough estimate. The surveillance of that data is flawed. And also, we do know that in a lot of these areas, there are also other health problems. And that means that people who already have underlying health conditions and children are more vulnerable. But what we are seeing is very atypical. We don't tend to see it outside of areas that are endemic, for example, Nigeria, et cetera. So in the cases that we have seen outside of Africa, there have been all mild cases.
OK, Dr. Lawton, then uncomfortable but not too threatening.
Yeah, I think so. I think, the second part of that question, why is it spreading so fast? Maybe it is, but maybe we're just recognising it and people are coming forward, getting tested so that we're seeing the cases. I think that may be part of the jump in numbers that have been reported in the last week or so.
Yeah, I mean, Oksana, is it the fact that there's media attention on this? 57 cases. It's a statistical blip in a nation of 65 million people. Is it actually spreading fast?
Well, I think, again, the reason it's this is not a new virus. As we said, monkeypox is something that was discovered decades ago. The reason it has so much media attention is because it hasn't been identified in this setting. It hasn't been spreading in high-income countries. And I think that's taken a lot of experts by surprise. So there is an element of we are trying to understand if it is possible for the transmission method to have slightly changed. Monkeypox belongs to orthopox viruses. So this is in the family of chickenpox, smallpox, and they tend to be really stable viruses. They don't tend to mutate so much. So very different situation to what we see with coronaviruses,
exactly,
which have a very long genome, lots of replication errors, lots of mutations. People have lost track almost of the number of different variants. So it's definitely not the same level of spread for sure, but there could be something different. We don't know yet. I think it's important to say that there are lessons being learned right now because it is unusual to see it in these other environments, but it could also be, as we heard from our other panelists, that our surveillance systems are just much more highly attuned post-COVID.
Yeah, that is the point, Dr. Lawton, isn't it? It is post-COVID. Well, it's still during COVID. Everyone's still on high alert. And that third part of the question, that's what people are thinking about. How likely is it we'd have a lockdown for it? And in actual fact, even if it did start spreading massively, would a lockdown work in these cases?
Well, I think you're right. I think people are very aware of COVID, and suddenly every cough and cold that we have, people have become aware of that perhaps we weren't before. And also what we've become is much more conscious of the potential infectivity of coughs and colds, and maybe not gone into work where we would have done before COVID. So I think that certainly has had some impact on behaviour. I think with monkeypox, it's very unlikely we're going to get to a situation where we would have a lockdown. This is a virus that's spread through close contact, mostly sort of skin to skin. It can be through infected clothes or bed linens, potentially droplets from close contact. So I think it's unlikely that it's going to spread perhaps in the same way in that arenas or wherever we may have had some of the initial problems with COVID. So I think that's unlikely. I mean, ultimately still very, very rare. Most people will have a very mild illness. So part of the reasons for lockdown with COVID was the fact it was going to overwhelm the health service. We don't expect to see that kind of problem with monkeypox. So yeah, I think we can be reasonably comfortable at the moment.
I'm going to stay with you, Dr. Lawton, for our next question, because it's clearly in your field of expertise. It's from Siobhan and asks, is it only spread through sexual contact? That's because a large proportion of the cases detected so far in the UK have been through homosexual, bisexual and men who have sex with other men. Is it, though? I mean, it clearly is close contact, but is it only spread through sexual contact?
No, absolutely not. And I think it's important that we don't sort of label this as a sexually transmitted infection. It's transmitted through sexual contact, close contact of any sorts. Now, obviously, sexual contact might mean that close contact is closer. It might mean that contact is for longer periods of time. And sex is very popular. And so, we do see it spread in that mechanism, but it's certainly not a sexually transmitted infection. And I think one of the problems that we still have, sadly, in this country is a lot of stigma surrounding sexually transmitted infections. So it's important that we don't introduce stigma, because that then becomes a barrier for people coming forward and getting tested, which is what we need to do to try and minimise the spread of this. Very
good point. So you mentioned testing there. Let's move on to my next question, not my next question, the viewer's next question, just asking, well, vaccines, of course, forefront of people's minds after the COVID experience. Do we have a vaccine for monkeypox, Oksana? Doesn't the smallpox vaccine have some role to play here?
Yeah, we have several vaccines that are available for the prevention of smallpox. These are old vaccines, and they do actually also, it was noted decades ago that it also helped to prevent monkeypox, up to 85% effective in preventing monkeypox as well. So there is some cross benefit. But of course, here in the UK, anyone who's under 50 is very unlikely to be vaccinated with smallpox, because that was eradicated in the 80s and the vaccination program wrapped up around then as well. So there are newer vaccines available since then, but they are not widely available. So the WHO is working with manufacturers to improve access for the newer vaccines, but there is already historically some good protection provided by the smallpox vaccine.
So does that mean, Dr. Lawton, that older people who've had the smallpox vaccination until it was eradicated, I know that younger people haven't because it's gone, but older people then are pretty well sorted?
I think we won't know necessarily how effective that vaccine may be some decades potentially after people have had it. We know from other vaccines such as COVID that immunity can wane over time, and it may be that there is some protection still down the line. It may not be as effective. Also, if there is close contact and there's a recommendation of vaccine, I think we'd probably still recommend people had that vaccine if they've been in contact.
Okay.
But I don't think it's going to be completely universal.
Okay. Good points and plenty more to come from you. Thank you very much indeed so far. We've got to take a short break. Do stay with us. After that break, we're going to be asking our panel more of those questions about monkeypox and what can be done to stop its spread. Welcome back. We're answering your questions about monkeypox. I've got Oksana Perzik with me, Global Health Advisor and Lecturer at UCL School of Pharmacy, and Dr. Mark Lawton from the Liverpool Centre for Sexual Health. So let's crack on in the time available. This question from Mallory. How long can monkeypox virus remain infectious on items outside the body? Well, how long or can it at all? Oksana, what's known about it?
Well, again, there's so much that is still unknown. It's not a very there are areas around this that are not well documented, and partly that has to do with our investment on diseases that are in low-income countries. But we do know that it can be infectious through bedding, through clothing, again in close contact. So while the virus would not be viable for very long, the exact period again unknown, there is that risk of it being transmitted through fabrics that have been up against open sores, lesions, etc.
Okay, we are cracking through the questions. This next one, let's put this to you then, Mark. With chickenpox being rife amongst children at the moment, how can you tell the difference between that and monkeypox? Yeah, what is the actual difference?
So firstly, I think we have to just point out that chickenpox is very common, and of course monkeypox is still very, very rare. So it's far, far more likely that a child would have chickenpox than monkeypox. There's a couple of key differences, I suppose, that are worth sort of pointing out. With monkeypox, we sometimes see swollen glands as part of that initial illness, and that's quite rare with chickenpox. The other thing is that monkeypox rash tends to occur sort of all at once, whereas chickenpox, you sort of keep getting new lesions coming throughout the time course. I think the only time particularly to be concerned in a young child might be is if there has been contact with somebody who's perhaps had foreign travel to some of those areas, such as West and Central Africa, where monkeypox therefore suddenly makes it more likely than chickenpox. But otherwise, I think chickenpox is very common, monkeypox is very rare.
Is it actually worse, monkeypox, in terms of how you feel?
So I think both illnesses can be, variable. Young children getting chickenpox, often very, very mild or no symptoms apart from itching from the rash. Likewise with monkeypox, very small proportion of people can get ill with monkeypox, and still with young children, very small proportion could get ill from chickenpox. So the severity doesn't necessarily dictate which is which.
Yeah, and we've seen some of the pictures, some pretty awful lesions. And so Matthew asks this question: Oksana, does monkeypox scar? Is it a bit like those of us that remember having chickenpox and indeed measles back in the day? If you scratch the scab, that's more likely to cause a scar, isn't it?
Yes. So in more severe cases where you have more severe lesions, they can also be even on the palm of the hands. That can cause scarring, particularly if the scabs are then scratched. So in more severe cases, you do see that these pustules, after they scab over scratched, they can leave scarring, but in milder cases, less so.
And I suppose we should have asked this first, but let's ask it last. And I think it's all we're going to have time for. From Anthony, why is it called monkeypox? Well, you kind of answered that already, but just be specific for us, Dr. Lawton.
Yeah, so it was first discovered, I think, in the 1950s amongst a colony of monkeys. So that's where the monkey bit comes from. And pox just sort of means a spot or a pustule, these vesicles, this rash that you get with monkeypox. So yeah, monkeys, first seen in monkeys, pox, the spots or the pustules.
Yeah, and so people worrying then, Oksana, that, well, coming from monkeys, it is this zoonotic spread again. Isn't that what's causing quite a lot of concern?
Well, we do see that there is a possibility that it does. It's a zoonotic illness, so it does transfer from animals to humans. But what we're seeing now is actually a human-to-human community transmission. So it isn't. Again, in endemic regions, we do see that spillover. But currently, the missing piece of puzzle is why is it happening in Europe and the Americas.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for helping us examine that puzzle, Oksana Perzic. Dr. Mark Lawton, very good talking to you. Thank you very much indeed. We are enlightened as much as we can be about monkeypox.